Mayans MC. Does this show fill up to the world that was created and built up in Sons of Anarchy as a great successor? Let's find out. As a preface to this review, I really love Sons of Anarchy, particularly seasons 1, 2, 4, and 5. That's not to say that the other seasons are bad. They're really good. Especially season 3, which has an excellent ending, but that's really the only thing I liked about season 3. I didn't mind the story in season 3. I just thought it was very dull compared to all of the other season storylines. But Sons of Anarchy in its heyday for season 2 and season 5, that was peak television right fucking there. For some reason, somebody must have whispered into Kurt Suiter's ear that he's a genius, because after season 5, season 5's finale had an hour-long runtime, which worked well for the story given and presented in Sons of Anarchy's season 5 finale. But then after that, Kurt Suiter was given the green light to just make every single episode of the remaining season's episodes after season 5 to be hour-long behemoth fucking episodes like he was making some giant HBO show. And while I did like the stories that were told in season 6 and 7, I didn't really like the runtime, because overexpanding the runtimes of each episode of Sons of Anarchy meant you were going to have less showing story. And honestly, that's what happened in season 6 and 7. The final season of Sons, there were some writing spots I didn't like, but season 6 especially, it was so overbearingly long that it started to just really feel dull to me. Now, it has a great storyline and a great ending payoff, but the ending payoff, honestly, it was quite predictable. It worked well with the story that was always told, but it felt super predictable with everything that they did in season 6, and especially how they directed and wrote the season. And then the final season of Sons of Anarchy had some really good shining moments, but a lot of it was overbearingly long. And it wasn't really dull, it was just really played out at that point where you kind of predicted everything. It was a good story overall, but everything was super predictable what was going to turn out. Now, after a couple years, Sons of Anarchy ended in 2014, and then in 2018, we get presented with the first season of Mayans MC, which is a spin-off and sequel to Sons of Anarchy. Mayans MC revolves around Ezekiel Easy Reyes and his brother Angel, and it starts out with Easy being a rat for the feds so that he could have gotten out of prison from his 25 to life stretch for killing a cop. And he's tasked to join the Mayans MC Club to gain information for the DEA because they are in association with the Galindo cartel from Mexico. And that's essentially the story of Mayans in its entirety, especially Mayans season 1. But throughout all of Mayans, that's essentially the story, the main story of Mayans. Now, Mayans is set up exactly like Sons of Anarchy was, where you go through the POV of one particular character who is inside of the motorcycle club, and you learn about all of these characters within the show. Now, what I can say about the story of Mayans MC, the entire series, is the first 2 seasons were co-written by Kurt Suiter and Elgin James. Kurt Suiter, who was the creator of Sons of Anarchy and a co-writer and actor and director of The Shield. Elgin James, I honestly don't really know anything about him. He's never really popped up on my Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb radar. But with Kurt Suiter, the first 2 seasons I thought were excellently written and directed. Now, I did see some flaws in Mayans, and I need to preface this as well. I did rewatch Mayans in the last half week so that I could get a very good, accurate opinion and review of the entirety of the series, including the season 5, the final season. And what I've noticed with this rewatch is the first 2 seasons with Kurt Suiter co-writing before he got fired for, in his own quotation, being an abrasive dick. The first 2 seasons excellent, complex storylines. I love the stories through and through. If I were to rank Mayan seasons 1 and 2, just based solely off the story, I would say 10 out of 10. The writing was excellent. The direction was phenomenal. Everything about the storylines and the writing was excellent. But I'm not just reviewing for the story. The first 2 seasons of Mayans, while the story was complex, intricately layered, well written, also suffered because of that. Not only because we had so much time for so much overstuffed story that we didn't really get too much of a hands-on for all of the characters to be developed. And in doing so, the first 2 seasons of Mayans felt like it was not really fully finished. I mean, obviously, story-wise, the first 2 seasons are finished. But character-wise, we still didn't really know too much about many of the characters. We knew a lot about Easy, and we knew a lot about Angel, and we knew a lot about the Rebels and the like. But we didn't really know too much about every character in existence of Mayan's first 2 seasons. Now, getting past the first 2 seasons, getting past when Kurt Sutter was fired for, in his quotation, being an abrasive dick, we get the last 3 seasons of Mayans, which were mainly just fully written by Elgin James, who mainly helmed the finales of the seasons and then a couple episodes within each season. The last 3 seasons of Mayans, honestly, I like that they were developing the characters a lot more than the first 2 seasons, but this is kind of the double-edged blade. Elgin James focused so much on developing the characters, he kind of forgot how to write complex storylines. Completely compassionate storylines, yes. You felt for these characters. But these episodes were still at least an hour long each, and it just felt the story at this point was incomplete. The characters were fully developed, but then the story was incomplete. They kind of did a one back where the first 2 seasons, the stories were perfect, but the characters suffered. But then the last 3 seasons, the characters were perfect, but the stories suffered. And honestly, if I were to choose which I would rather want to rewatch over and over, I'd say the first 2 seasons of Mayans, because at least it all felt cohesive and complex. The last 3 seasons feel like such a slog because there isn't really much story to it. And honestly, rewatching the entire series, I wanted so badly to say in this review that it was poorly written after the 3rd season premiere, but that's not it. The stories told in Mayan season 3 to 5, they're perfectly fine. I don't have a problem with the writing. I don't have a problem with the stories or the characters. I have a problem with the direction. It's all a giant slog because there's not enough story between seasons 3 to 5, and that's the biggest sin of all of Mayans. I can get past loss of character development for the sake of story. I cannot get past 10 minutes long of scenes where it's just exploring a character's facial reactions, and that's basically what they did in Sons of Anarchy's last 2 seasons, and they put into Mayans' last 3 seasons because they didn't really have as much story to tell as the first 2 seasons. And that's a shame because this show, while it didn't start out perfectly, I thought it was an excellent start. Like, honestly, the first 2 seasons of Mayans were way better than the first 2 seasons of Sons. Now, the 2nd season of Sons of Anarchy is pitch perfect, but the first season, you really have to build up to the finale of that season. Whereas Mayans, they were introducing everything and everybody right from the get-go. It wasn't just introduction of the club, it was introduction to the club, introduction to the characters, introduction to the main story. It worked very well for the hour-long runtime that they were given. And not to mention that FXX now is like its own HBO, where the Suns characters, when they come in every now and again, they're actually allowed to use profanity and the like, which makes sense being motorcycle clubs that are lawless. Now, the quality of Mayans overall, the biggest thing I can say about the quality of its content is that the only downside to it are the blood and gore effects. A lot of times the blood looks super fake and you can extremely tell. But otherwise though, the gunfights and everything looks phenomenal. And as far as the audio and visuals go, I noticed in the first 2 seasons the audio wasn't really up to snuff with the last portion of the series. And the visuals, the video, the shooting of this series, I love that the first 2 seasons were filmed with cameras in 1.78 full aspect ratio full screen. That's how TV is supposed to be made. But Kurt Sutter was fired, Elgin James took over, and I'm going to say Elgin James requested new cameras because seasons 3 to 5 are shot in 2.00 widescreen aspect ratio, much like Netflix does for a lot of their series, and HBO is starting to do it, like in We Own the City and shit. And I don't like it. I don't fucking like it. I watch TV series to get the full screen picture. I want the full screen picture. If I want to watch a widescreen film, I watch a fucking horror movie. That's what widescreen is meant for. Like the Ryan Reynolds film Buried, set in 2.4 widescreen aspect ratio, which is phenomenally put for a film like such where it's claustrophobic. Widescreen presentation is really only meant for horror films, in my personal opinion. Everything else should be full-on full screen, and the reason is because filming in IMAX is full screen. So if IMAX is full screen, then why can't TV series? Every TV series used to be. Even the big box TVs were 4:3 aspect ratio, but it still was presented in full screen. It was just different presentation because it was actually full screen and not widescreen. But that's the biggest cardinal sin I have against Mayans. The last 3 seasons, 2.00 widescreen aspect, didn't like it. And especially compared to the first 2 seasons, which were full screen, it just felt super jarring. And I understand it makes it feel layered. It makes it look just very expansive. It makes it look expensive. It makes it look great. And I get that entirely. I do. But you can still do that with full screen if you just put some initiative into it. Overall for me, Mayans, it started off extremely well, and then after Kurt Sutter's firing, it wasn't terrible, but you can just tell that they lost the story guy. And overall for me, all they had to do for Mayans with the last 3 seasons was just trim down the runtime. That's all they really had to do, and it would have been a fine show to keep rewatching. But overall, Mayans, the entire TV series, is a 6 out of 10. Because mainly it suffered from the last 3 seasons. 3, 4, and 5. Now, this show ends phenomenally. Every character deserves their ending that they get at the very end of this show. 10 out of 10 for the very end of this. Excellent payoff for the entire series. But to get there starts to become a huge slog at the start of Season 3. Now, Season 3 started off fine, but halfway through Season 3, when they were just running out of story and just kind of meandering along because they got this long runtime, that's when the show really starts to break down. So 6 out of 10, Mayans MC. Thank you.